My name is Sabne Raznik, and you have found the channel here on YouTube where I do what I call mini readings. And the reason why I call it that is I just read one poem. Sometimes it's my work, sometimes it's somebody else's. I have quite the library here going back to 2011. There's probably over 100 poems, 100 videos on here over the years now. So feel free to go back and see if you find any poems you like. I can't, I like to think of this, hopefully not narcissistically, but I like to think of this as kind of a reading rainbow, but for poetry. And I gathered poems here from all over the world, um, adding poems at least once a month. Um, we're working on that. I may up the schedule here soon, because this has been going pretty well this whole year doing it once a month. Because what I've been doing is I film things in blocks. Like I'll film like 5 or 6 videos in a day and then put them up once a month. And that has helped me to keep this fairly regularly. That's been going well. And I've been considering maybe upping the schedule. We'll see if it continues to go well until I finish putting up the block of videos that I have filmed at the moment. I may consider upping the schedule. We'll see how that goes. In the meantime, what usually happens on this channel is that when I am reading world poetry, I tend to read the English translations because that is the language I'm most familiar with. And it's the lingua franca. Okay, apparently my mouth is not going to cooperate with me today. I have cerebral palsy, and that affects how I'm able to use my mouth because cerebral palsy affects your ability to control your muscles, and your ability to speak requires the cooperation of many, many muscles at the same time. Anyway, apparently I'm going to have trouble with that today. English is the most common language of the internet, so that's also a reason why I choose to use English, the English translations. If you find a poem on here that you really like and you can read its original language, I encourage you to look at both the original language and the English translation. You can even put them side by side and enjoy them like that because poetry in translation can often be a very different art form than the original poem. It's because poetry is like that. So if you're able to do that, enjoy it. If not, then that's what poetry and translation is for, so that we can experience poetry from other languages that we would not otherwise be able to enjoy. Um, and that's the reason why I never monetized this channel, so that I would be able to share poetry from all around the world, from all these different poets. Where I am able to get permission, I do. And where I am not, then I hope that, you know, um, it's a small channel, so I don't think I'm stepping on anybody's toes there because currently we don't have that very many subscribers, although I hope that will change. But also because we're all just sharing the joy of poetry, and I'm sure every poet in the world appreciates exposure because the poetry world is such a small place in terms of exposure for everybody. Just the way poetry works, you know. You I could do a whole video on how poetry publishing works, the business of it works, that would explain how why it is that poets are willing to trade simply for exposure more so than other forms of writers. But that would be a whole nother video. And you're not here for that. You're here for joy, not business, right? Today's video is going to be very special to me personally because we are a little more than a week out from Hurricane Helene. I'm filming this on um, September, yes. Yeah, it feels like a long time since Hurricane Helene because a lot has happened, and I'm sure it feels like a long time for those who are in the disaster zone too. Uh, it's actually, okay, I was reading that backwards. I was reading it the European way. It's actually October 9th, 2024. See, that's why I said that and my brain said, no, read it again. It's I'm filming this on October 9th, 2024, and Helene came through, I think, September 29th, 2024. So a little more than a week since Helene came through. Absolutely devastating. Helene was a Cat 4, which I remember when Katrina first happened in 2005. She was a Cat 5 back then. They've changed the measuring system. And I remember because it was a big deal back then, they kept saying she was a Cat 5, and the reason why the levee failed in New Orleans is because it was designed for a Cat 3. And now, whenever you go back and you look at information about Katrina, it will say Katrina was a Cat 3. And I was like, well, that confirmed for me. I already had suspicions that they had changed the measurement system. But when I went back and saw, after Helene happened, I went back and Googled Katrina, and I saw that Katrina is considered a Cat 3 now, and I remember very plainly them talking about her being a Cat 5 because that was that was what the big deal was, is that the levee was only um, designed for a Cat 3 and she was bigger than that. And I was like, okay, so that definitely confirms for me that they have changed the category system in the meantime, and that makes sense because they have also changed the category system for tornadoes. It used to be, and you can track this very easy. When the Twisters movie, the original Twisters movie came out, it was F3, F4, F5, right? And this year they put out a new Twisters movie. They put out a remake, and the category systems they used in the remake movie was EF for EF5. So it's real easy to track that. And I guess that's what got me thinking about it. And then whenever this happened with Helene, and I actually went back and Googled Katrina, and I was like, wait, they're saying Katrina was a Cat 3. And I remember real plain that that was part of the news footage as a big deal why the levee failed, right? So they definitely have changed the category system for hurricanes too. And so Helene being a Cat 4 and being this catastrophic is mind blowing. And now Milton is on its way in, supposed to make landfall. I thought it was tomorrow, but the most recent information I saw might even be today. I keep getting conflicting information about Milton, and it might be because um, I think the uh, the local places where my phone picks up its radar at may have been affected by Helene, and so I can't really get accurate weather radar information right now because I live in Appalachia. So it's like I keep getting conflicting information on Milton, and also I think it keeps changing because sometimes they'll say it's a Cat 5, sometimes they'll say keeps going back and forth between Cat 5 and Cat 4. So it's like it seems I'm getting the impression that it's an extremely unstable storm, even as hurricanes go. But anyway, I thought it was supposed to make landfall tomorrow. Some sources say today. But anyway, that's coming in. So, this hurricane season started out surprisingly quiet, and apparently it's going to go out pounding the drums of the end of time. I don't know, it's crazy at the end here. But anyway, Helene was especially devastating for Appalachia because it did something that no storm has ever done before, and no storm was ever supposed to be able to be possible to do, which was it hit the panhandle of Florida and well, the whole east coast of Florida, then the panhandle, Georgia, Alabama, and literally climbed the spine of the Appalachians because they start or end, depending on your perspective, in Alabama and Georgia, and they go all the way up into Canada. So if you're looking at it from purely the U.S. standpoint, they go all the way up into New York, right? Um, so people, when they think about Appalachia, generally what springs to their mind right off, and also where the stereotype comes from, is usually West Virginia, full stop. But it's actually, and sometimes they'll throw in a little bit of Virginia and a little bit of Kentucky with that, which is where I'm at, Eastern Kentucky. But usually what they think of is West Virginia. And that's also where they pull the stereotype mostly from, is a very inaccurate, ugly picture of West Virginia that's not even true, but that's what springs to people's minds. But Appalachia is actually 13 states within the U.S., but it actually goes up into Canada. There's parts of it that go down. Um, there are parts of it that are in Scotland, parts of it that are in Africa, because when all the land masses of the world used to be one continent, and then that one continent split. The Appalachians were on that one continent, and when that one continent split, it split the Appalachians across continents. It's really actually cool. So like when you hear people talk about the Highlands in Scotland, the Highlands are actually part of the Appalachians. It's the same mountain system. It's really cool. Um, but so this storm, usually the cool thing about the Appalachian Mountains usually is that these hurricanes come in to North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. And then they hit some side of the Appalachians there, whichever direction they're coming from. And the mountains, it's like if you've watched the way the clouds work in the air, it's very similar to the way water runs in a creek. And when they hit the mountains, it breaks the storm up just like it would when the water hits rocks, you know. So and it breaks the storm up, and then it ceases being a hurricane. It takes a little while sometimes, but it breaks it up. So whoever's on the other side of those mountains doesn't get that storm, right? And it saves whoever's on the other side of that mountain. And a lot of times it saves the people in the mountains too, because whoever's at the side of the mountains that it hits breaks it up, and then they might get a little bit of it, but they don't get it real bad usually, and then because it just breaks it up, just like when water hits rocks. Well, it didn't this time. Not with Lee. She was a monster. She did something that weather has never ever done before, as far as we know. She hit the Appalachians there at the very bottom, and she was climbing the spine, so it should have broke her like nothing. But it didn't. She climbed over that spine, and she kept going right all the way up, all the way up, all the way up to me. And I'm sitting on the Virginia Kentucky border on the big, what we call the big mountain around here, which is Pine Mountain. And you can Google Pine Mountain on the Virginia Kentucky border. It's like Pine Mountain is like 100 and some miles long, maybe longer. I haven't Googled it in a long time. And I'm on one end where it terminates. Okay, on the I'm on this little town called Elkhorn City, Kentucky. Little old tiny town. There's like, I don't know, 1,000 of us maybe that live here is all. And there's this park that's internationally famous called the Breaks Park. It's called the Grand Canyon of the South, and it really does look like the Grand Canyon, except it's covered in trees and it's smaller. And they have, in October, which is right now, they have whitewater season where they release the dam and they have world class rapids, and people come from all over the world to kayak and go down in inner tubes. Actually, they don't recommend inner tubes, but the locals do it in inner tubes because they've done it in inner tubes for centuries. For as long as there have been inner tubes, we'll put it that way. So, as long as there have been cars. And Native Americans did it in canoes before that. So, like, um, anyway, it climbed all the way up to Pine Mountain. and it finally broke on Pine Mountain. And the awful thing about that is when it hit Pine Mountain and broke on Pine Mountain, it stalled on Pine Mountain, which is at my back slightly. I mean, it's at my back and kind of over that way because we're at the terminus end of it on this end. And it's stuck there, which means everybody in Tennessee and North Carolina at its back and part of Virginia at its back, it's stuck there for a couple hours while that mountain broke it at. Mountains literally fell down. Mountains fell down. It wasn't just flooding, it was mountains fell down, and I'm not exaggerating. It's been awful for those people. There, and you can't really understand the magnitude of the disaster unless you understand the logistics of Appalachia, like the way people live, the way the houses are set up, what a holler is, and all of that. So it's really difficult to explain it to you um, unless you live here. Unless you've gone door to door and walked these hollers, or you get to the end of a 20-mile holler and you go, I don't know. I think this might be the last house up here, but that looks like it might be a hiking trail. Or look, that's a dry creek bed, and look, it might. Does that look like tire tracks in that dry creek bed to you? Look, let's put our vehicle in low and kick it and just explore up here and see if there just see if there's anything up here. And then you get 20, not 20, you get like 10 more miles up in there, and lo and behold, there's a house up there with a living human being in it that's not on any map anywhere, that nobody knows is there except the people who live there right now. Those people in that house that's 10 miles up past the head of that holler where there ain't no more other houses. I've done went into hillbilly speak. I hope you can still understand me. I forgot to code switch. That is maybe just a dry creek bed for the road to get out of there. They need help. They're cut off from everybody. Their house may be gone, everything they own. They have no electricity, no power, no food, no nothing. Maybe they didn't even have that to begin with, because there's a lot of people that lives up through there that are completely self-sufficient, and they choose to live that way. Those are what we call, because there's hillbillies, what everybody calls hillbillies, because they just don't know because they're from California or whatever. And then there's those of us who live here, like me, and then there's the real hill people. There's the hill people that people like me call the real hill people. And those are the ones I'm talking about. The ones that live way up in there, that are on no map at all and live self sufficiently. But even in a disaster like this, even they need help, okay? And nobody knows they're up there. The only way anybody is ever going to find them right now to rescue them is if they're a local, they're a neighbor, and they know they're up there because they're local, or from the air, because they're not on anybody's maps anywhere, and the government doesn't even know they're up there because they're the real hill people. I'm just telling you, there is the logistics of this disaster, and then even the people that live closer together in the hollers, that everybody's going to know we're there. Most people in Appalachia, their personal driveways are bridges. So when this happened and everything flooded, each individual house, if it's even still there, became an island unto itself. I mean, it's impossible for somebody who is not from around here, as we say, to understand the magnitude of this disaster. And I can tell you that even the military does not plan for a scenario like this. And I'm not poo pooing on the government, it's just not a situation that anybody has ever conceived could ever possibly happen before. It's not supposed to be possible. And just the logistics of the area and the mountains and the way people live the way they have to live because of the topography, I guess is the word, topography. It's not something that anybody was ever prepared for or could even conceive of. So, I mean, when we say, and I'm sure you've seen this online, when we say that this is a disaster of love of neighbor and neighbor helping neighbor, it's not an exaggeration because the government is trying to help, but there is only so much they can do in a scenario where they don't even know where people live exactly because they're not on the map all the time. Most of them are, but there's going to be like thousands of people, the real hill people that aren't even on a map, that still need help. And there are going to be places that only a mule or a dog or a goat can get to right now. And dogs and goats can be pack animals. They can't carry as much as a mule, but they can be pack animals. Goats can carry like 50 pounds, I think, an adult goat. And a dog can carry a good heavy pack too if they're trained. Turn them loose in the hills and let them go find people. Hmm. See, us Appalachians know how to use our animals that way. It's called going old school. Because sometimes in a situation like this, it's like, all right, we gotta go old school. Where's our mules at? Where's our dogs at? Where's our goats at? I saw a reel, you know how these social media sites, the little short videos that are like 10 seconds long. It depends on which social media site you're on, whether it's a short or a reel or a whatever. Um, I saw a reel where uh, this man had, it was a private owner, has a Huey helicopter, like they used in the Vietnam War. He has a Huey helicopter. He's out there flying around. He's a private citizen flying around North Carolina looking for people because there's a lot of people you're only going to see from the air, which I was like, well, that's just like fabulous. But anyway, um, that is, I can't even, there's not words to describe to you the magnitude of this disaster. And I'm not downplaying the horror that the folks in Florida are in either because they got hit hard too. And then Milton coming in right behind it, and Milton can't decide if it's a Cat 5 or not. But after seeing what a Cat 4 can do, I can't even imagine a Cat 5. It's like, with all due respect to Florida, maybe it's time for y'all to move. I don't know. I don't know. It's just awful. Um, but I am, and this is going to be a controversial statement for some, I am part Cherokee. And I have been separated from the tribe since removal. It was the genocide of the indigenous peoples. It was a very chaotic and traumatic time. And there were those who ended up on the trails of tears. We should say that plural because all the tribes had trails of tears, and all the tribes had multiple trails of tears for each tribe. Um, it's generally said singular, but it should be multiple. Um, and there were those who got left behind, and later, in like especially in the case of the Cherokee, some who were left behind, who managed to stay behind in the homeland, were granted a reservation on the east side in North Carolina, and they are being looked after by the uncles and aunties, or I should say aunties and uncles, because the Cherokee are a matrilineal tribe. They are being looked after, or they were in the past, before European ideas of how they should run their own business. They were a matrilineal tribe. Um, the aunties and uncles from Oklahoma did fly back into the homeland to look to help the Eastern Band out in their time of trouble here, which was very heartwarming for me to see. So you have the ones who were in Oklahoma, you have the ones that were given a reservation here in North Carolina, but there are also those like me who, in order to remain on the homeland, which at the time was the main objective, the most sacred thing was to remain on the homeland, and it was worth sacrificing everything for. And the only way you can understand why that is to understand the indigenous beliefs around the sacredness of the homeland, which I cannot explain to you here. I don't know if I don't know if someone who is not indigenous can understand that. It's it's a culture leap, I think, for someone from a European background. I don't think they can make that leap. It would take a lot. It would take a lot. Um, but for my ancestors, direct ancestors, it was worth sacrificing literally everything, including their identity, to stay in the homeland. And so they were willing to be separated from tribe and everything to stay. Now, in living memory, like my mother's living memory, there were family members who had Cherokee names. And my mom had a Cherokee name. Uh, she gave me one just because I was like, please, 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 please. um, but it's at the point now where I don't think the Eastern Band of Cherokee would accept me as a member, and I probably wouldn't seek to become a member. Um, they still go by blood quotient laws. You have to meet a certain blood quotient. A lot of Native American tribes no longer have that. The Oklahoma in the reservation in Oklahoma no longer holds to that law, but the Eastern Band does. So what happens for the Cherokees like me is we get a lot of prejudice from European folks. I don't want to call them white folks. That's just so complicated, isn't it? Um, it just seems, ugh, I don't know. And we get a lot of prejudice from them because well, in my case, I look white, which is um, complicates things. But I'm not white, so I get all this. Where are you from? Are you from France? Or well, everybody in my family's got that. My grandmommy, she was very olive skin toned, and they would ask her if she was like from Asia, as in like China and stuff. She didn't look Chinese at all. But that's what people would ask her. And it's like, what they're seeing in us is the indigenous, but we don't look indigenous enough for them to ask us if we're indigenous. It's like, and then from the Native Americans, some of them clock us as Native American. I've had that happen where people just randomly come up to us and like, I can just tell because they look at us. They'll just stand there and look at us real hard for a long time before they speak, and I'm like, they can see it, they can see it. But then we look white, so they're not sure. But then we also get those that are like, oh, oh, especially if they do get up the nerve to ask us, and then we're like, oh, we're Cherokee. Then they're like, oh, they're the pretend Indians, you know, and that's a kind of racism too. So we get it from both sides. And so we end up being people without belonging, without a group, without a tribe. And that is devastating too. And it's devastating also because even in my own larger extended family, none of us are white, right? We're all to some degree Cherokee, and but there are those that will stand there and argue with me until their last breath that they are white. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, no, because you have the same grandparents I do. Great grandparents I do. You're not. You're not. You have the same family customs I do. But unlike you, I have done the research. You know, you have forgotten why you do them. You just do them. But I have done the research and I've discovered that we do them because the Cherokee had this custom and it's the same thing. But anyway, so when all this happened, and the Cherokee homeland was huge, it was huge. It was so huge that other tribes shared parts of it with us. Because why not? We had the room. It was like Alabama, Georgia, parts of South Carolina, North Carolina, almost all of North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Virginia. It's huge. Bigger than most maps today show it to be. So when all this happened, and it's like right smack in the middle of Cherokee homeland, oh, devastating to me personally, because the land is sacred. And there are those who know me that will be scandalized to hear that come out my mouth, but it it's not what you think I'm saying. Okay. It is and it's not at the same time. Because it's impossible for you to understand it. Because you're coming at it with a European viewpoint. So you can't understand what I mean when I say sacred. It's a cultural difference, and I can't explain it to you. But the land is sacred. And here's something that science is just now catching up on, and it's part of understanding what we mean when we say the land is sacred. The land is also sentient. And I know all of you are going to be like, ah, too, because you're also coming at it from a European point of view. But science is just starting to understand this, okay? We don't mean that there's a spirit in it. Although some indigenous do. Do some research about how trees communicate with each other, about how they can feel, because they do. They feel pain, they feel. And you'll see what I mean. Trees and plants, the dirt itself communicates and has feelings, it can feel things. Science is coming to recognize this, okay? And this is part of what we mean as indigenous cultures when we say the land is sacred and the land is our brother or our sister. It's people get it wrong, they think it's some kind of hoodoo, but no, science is starting to catch up with this. And it's there. It's there. Do the research because science is coming to realize it. Okay. Anyway, so when all this happens, and then Helene comes along, and the best way I can describe it is she stalls out on Pine Mountain and literally just vomits on everything behind Pine Mountain and south for miles. And I'm like, and mountains literally just collapse. And mountains are still collapsing. A couple days ago, they had another mountain collapse because the earth's still moving. It disturbed the ground so much that mountains are still moving. And I've been mourning for this, like as for a relative, you know, because it's my homeland and these are my people. And this is where I have lived my whole life, just about. Just I had a brief interlude in Cincinnati when my nephew had cancer. I lived up in Cincinnati for 6 months, but I have lived somewhere in Appalachia my entire life, and my people have been here for as long as there have been humans on the earth. And I have other people that have lived in Scotland. I can trace that back till uh, Ivar the Boneless. So, and that's Appalachia too in Scotland. I mean, it's like this is my home. This is my land. This is me. This the land is me and I am the land. And I'm pretty sure that most everybody who lives here feels that way, whether they are European or not, regardless of their ethnic background, whether they are Cherokee or not. Regardless of their ethnic background, it seems like everybody who lives here comes to feel that way about these mountains. They have different reasons for feeling that way about it. And they feel that way to varying degrees, but they all seem to come to feel that way, that they are part of the land and the land is part of them. So to have this happen to Appalachia that was supposed to never be able to happen, it's supposed to be completely impossible. And as far as we know, it's never happened before except for maybe Noah's flood in Bible times, which may have even created Appalachia for all we know. Um, uh, it's like absolutely devastating, not just to the land and not just to the people in terms of being in literal survival mode, but emotionally and mentally. Like, I have been in tears for days and it feels like for a week, but that week feels like a decade. It feels like my mother has died, or at least, well, maybe not that she's died, because Appalachia will survive. It always survives, but it feels like a devastating illness, you know, that she will never be the same from ever again. And especially when they closed the Tennessee North Carolina border, I had a real hard time with that. It's opening up in some places. I think they opened up not the commercial road, I call them the commercial roads, not the government roads. They opened up some roads that there's a park, which I can't think of the name of right now because I have trouble with names and I've been having trouble with names and nouns since my nephew had cancer. It may be like the effects of being around his chemo all the time. with him. Because, like, he was taking all the chemo and then it would come out his pores and stuff. And we were supposed to be suited up and we weren't supposed to touch him, but he was like 9, 10, 11 years old. It's like, we're not going to suit up and we are going to touch him. He's a child. We can bring ourselves not to, you know. And it may be like the permanent effects of being exposed to his chemo like that. It's altered my brain, caused me to have trouble with names and nouns. And also in 2020, I started having seizures, which the doctors still don't know why, but they are treating them. And that's caused me to have even more trouble with names and nouns and long term memory. Um, well, and sometimes even short term memory. Sometimes I do dumb stuff. Like one time I tried to take a shower with the stopper still in the drain and almost flooded my bathroom. And I know that's what that was because I would never have done that pre-seizures. But anyway, so I can't remember the name of the park, but it's Smoky Mountain something. Anyway, they've opened up the park roads that go from Tennessee to North Carolina within the park. So that's open, but I don't know if they've opened like any state or state roads between one or the other yet. Um, but when they closed the border, that really hurt my feelings because it felt like I don't think that's ever happened in history where um, they have closed a state border like that. Not even during the Civil War, as far as I mean, I'm sure that North and South were closed, but I don't think that a part of the Cherokee homeland was closed off from another part of the Cherokee homeland because most of the Cherokee homeland were Confederates, and even the parts of like Kentucky was officially neutral, and people families got split between whether they chose to be on the north side or the south side. You know, it was the Civil War was messy like that. Um, so I think like that was probably the first time in history that a state border was closed, and it felt like an amputation, like they cut off a limb of the land. It was awful. It just felt awful. And I thought to myself, is this what it felt like when the Europeans started making state borders to begin with? Is this what my ancestors felt when they came in and they took the land and started hacking it up into states to begin with? You know, because originally it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been in states like that. It would have been Cherokee homeland and this homeland, and you, you know, it was different. And I was like, that's an interesting feeling. So I was kind of like, well, it was extremely painful. I cried all night because I learned about it like at 9:30 at night or something, and I cried all night. And I thought, I wonder if that's similar to what they felt whenever they started making states to begin with and started hacking the land up like that. I don't know, it's just a thought that I had. Anyway, I've been talking for almost an hour and haven't even got to the poem yet, but um, what I wanted to do as a tribute to Appalachia in the wake of Helene was I wanted to write. I came across this poem, and it was they read it in a short from a video I guess that they made in 1984 to honor a congressman, an Appalachian congressman that died in '84, and I thought, well, that's beautiful. I want to find that poem because it's just so poignant for what's going on right now, and I found it. Wasn't at all surprised when I found it that it turned out to be James Steele, who is like one of the most beloved Appalachian writers and poets. He is most connected to a place called Troublesome Creek, which is around, um, see, names, nouns, give me a second. Hyndman, Hyndman, Kentucky. And Hyndman, Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, obviously, it's a little bit of a haul from me. It's like 2 hours or something. I've been there once because that's where they have the Appalachian Writers Workshop, which is like the place to go if you're an Appalachian writer. I got to go on a scholarship one time. Too poor to go on my own. But it was wonderful because it's like where all the upper echelon of Appalachian writers go every year and have a workshop and rub elbows. It's usually in August, and but it is kind of pricey for somebody like me, so I only got to go once, but it was fabulous. I loved it. And it's actually where I got the idea to start the Avant Appalachia Easy. Um, so I came home from the workshop and got to work on that, and I think we started the easing the very next year. But James Steele, he lived in a cabin, a log cabin, like it's on the school property, the Hyman Sediment School property, and the Hyman Sediment School is where they have the Appalachian Writers Week. So um, you can actually go and see the cabin when you're there, and I think that's where they you stand in the yard of his cabin. I think to take the picture um, at the end of the week. Everybody goes and stands in front of the cabin and takes the picture. Um, So he's like a big deal for Appalachian people. And they also have, I'm pretty sure it's one of his works. He wrote this long poem about Appalachia. And at like the night before the end of the week, that night before, they all go to a certain spot and they do a round robin reading of that um, long poem. And it's like this ritual thing that they do at the Writers' Week. But this is a short poem. This one is called Heritage. James Steele, he lived from, oh, wake up. He lived from 1906 to 2001. And I just thought it's a beautiful poem to read in tribute to Appalachia and the people of Appalachia, whatever their ethnic background. Most people who live in Appalachia are actually of a mixed ethnic background, like myself, um, because people in Appalachia were always very open and free about mixed marriage from the beginning, because the indigenous were always very open about it. Um, so this is called Heritage, and I think this very um, expresses the feelings of just about everybody I have ever known who was born and raised in Appalachia. Like I said, everybody who lives here comes to feel that this place, that Appalachia is sacred to some level, to some degree, for their own personal reasons. Everybody has their own reasons, but they all seem to come to the same thought about it as, you know, they all want to protect the mountains and keep them beautiful. It becomes an over my dead body thing for everybody. And sometimes comes to that because the commercial interests will have the resources that they so desire regardless. But everybody seems to feel the same way about these mountains if they are born and raised here or spend a significant portion of their life here for. Um, so I thought this would be an appropriate poem to read as tribute post-Helene during this time when attempting to rescue people and clean up the mess. And when we say it's going to be long haul, we mean long haul because, I've already explained why. Whew, yeah. Okay, heritage. Hopefully, I'll read this really well. I shall not leave these prisoning hills, though they topple their barren heads to level earth, and the forests slide uprooted out of the sky. Though the waters of Troublesome, of Trace Fork, of Sand Lake rise in a single body to glean the valleys, to drown lush Pennyroyal, to unravel rail fences. Though the sunball breaks the bridges into dust and burns its strength into the blistered rock, I cannot leave. I cannot go away. Being of these hills, being one with the fox, stealing into the shadows, one with the newborn foal, the lumbering ox drawing green beech logs to mill, one with the destined feet of man climbing and descending, and one with death rising to bloom again. I cannot go. Being of these hills, I cannot pass beyond. I cannot go over my dead body. And even if the mountain shall collapse, fitting tribute for Appalachia and its people, for my Appalachia and the people I know to be in it. What's the hashtag everybody's using? Appalachia Strong. So I hope that you won't forget about Appalachia in the time to come because it's going to continue to need support and help for a long time to come in this recovery, and winter is coming, which is going to make it so much worse, so much harder to get to. And I feel for Florida too. But it's times like this whenever people realize, I think, the value of poetry. Um, it reminds me of, you know, 9/11. Seemed like after 9/11, everybody was quoting poetry. And it's times like this whenever you realize that poetry helps you to express those feelings for which other forms of art really can't help you find the words. And it helps you, in this case, express resilience, even whenever it's really hard to see resilience, how that's going to work. This, I think, the resilience that's apparent in heritage is the same resilience that had people get out their mules and their goats and their dogs to go find their neighbors that maybe the government won't be able to find. Yep. And Appalachia will survive. It always has and it always will. But it did take an awful blow. An awful blow nobody ever thought would happen. And so, in a wild, wild week, I tell you. But I hope you have a fabulous day. And I hope that you are safe and warm and have plenty of food and all that loveliness. And that the next video finds us all on better footing, no matter where we are. Thank you for listening. And don't I go hunt me.